consider the sheet. It is plain white linen, folded, stacked, and quiet. It does not speak. It does not diagnose. It does not cure in the modern sense. And yet, for a very long time, the sheet belonged to the history of care. It belonged to the bed, to the ward, to the nurse, to the porter, to the laundress, to the clerk who counted bundles, and to the patient who felt the difference between a sour blanket and a clean one. Welcome to the Sleepy Medical History channel. Tonight, we are not going to the operating theatre. We are not watching a discovery happen in a burst of drama. We are staying instead with the quieter side of medical history, with hospital laundry before dawn, with the linen room, the airing rack, the folded towel, the cart in the service corridor, the steam in the washhouse, and the small repeated work that made a hospital feel orderly before most of its patients were fully awake. This is history, not medical advice. The episode moves slowly and carefully. It is concerned with objects, rooms, habits, and systems. It avoids sensational detail. If you are ready, let us begin where many hospital mornings began, at the bed. In the 19th century, Florence Nightingale wrote about nursing in a way that joined together several things that might otherwise seem separate. Air, warmth, light, cleanliness, quiet, observation, and bedding belonged to the same field of responsibility. To care for a patient was not only to wait for medicine to act. It was also to think about the room, the bed, the state of the sheets, the smell of the air, and the many surroundings that either supported rest or quietly worked against it. That is useful for our story, because hospital laundry can sound at first like a minor domestic matter. It can sound like background work, but in the older hospital, background work shaped the experience of illness. A sheet that had been aired, dried, folded, and brought back in good order was not merely cloth. It was part of the patient's environment. It touched the skin. It held warmth. It absorbed dampness. It carried the feel of order or the feel of neglect. So imagine a ward before sunrise. Not darkness exactly, but the slow blue of early morning at the windows. The patients are mostly still. A lamp is low. The corridor beyond the ward door is quieter than it will be an hour from now. Somewhere, before the day formally begins, hospital work is already in motion. A bundle is being counted. A cart is being pushed. A shelf is being checked. The story of hospital laundry begins at the bedside, but it does not stay there. It moves outward. It moves to the linen room, where shelves carry folded sheets and bundled cloth. It moves to the wash house, where fabric is handled in larger numbers than the patient ever sees. It moves to the corridor, where clean linen returns in a cart. It moves to the desk, where someone records what came in, what went out, and what still must be accounted for before the morning grows busy. That is one of the most restful things about this subject. It is a history of movement without spectacle. Things pass from hand to shelf, from shelf to cart, from cart to ward, from ward back to handling spaces, and then round again. It is circular work, repeated work, the kind of work that is easy to miss until you notice that an institution depends on it. If we stay for a moment in Nightingale's world, we can see why bedding mattered so much. Her writing repeatedly returns to the ordinary physical surroundings of the patient. Ventilation mattered, personal cleanliness mattered, quiet mattered, the state of the room mattered, and bedding, simple as it sounds, was wrapped into all of that. A bed was not only furniture, it was part of the patient's immediate climate. That idea changes the scale of our subject. Laundry stops being a basement chore and becomes a part of care's physical architecture. Now let us leave the bedside and enter the linen room. The linen room is one of those spaces that rarely appears in grand historical paintings. It is not where the surgeon stands. It is not where the physician lectures. It is not where the hospital announces itself, but it is where the institution proves that it can maintain order. The room holds sheets, towels, blankets, pillow covers, aprons, and cloths, each of them folded into recognizable shapes, each of them waiting for the next demand. The shelves are practical. The bundles are tied. The air is dry if someone has done their work properly. The tags, if tags are present, are turned away from us in this sleepy account, because what matters here is not the exact handwriting, but the habit of keeping count. Hospitals had to know what belonged where. They had to keep enough clean linen moving to support the ward, the nurse, and the endless return of ordinary need. The room is quiet, but it is not passive. A linen room is a planning room, even when no one in it thinks of themselves as a planner. Every folded stack implies a prediction. How many beds will need changing? How many towels will move out before noon? Whether the weather has slowed drying, whether the wash house is behind, whether one corridor has consumed more linen than expected. Hospital order has always depended partly on such estimates, even when they were made by habit rather than by formal statistics. And because hospitals grew over time into more organized institutions, these domestic departments became more important, not less. Nightingale's writing on hospitals is useful here. She treated planning, sanitation, ventilation, and administration as connected concerns. A hospital could not be judged only by the moment of treatment. It also had to be judged by its systems, by how it managed its air, its spaces, its arrangements, and the many practical supports without which care became disorderly. That brings us to the wash house. The wash house before dawn is not the dramatic wash house of fiction, full of shouting and rushing. In this telling, it is slower. Steam hangs low. Tubs stand ready. Wooden tables wait for sorting and folding. Fabric arrives in uneven shapes and leaves in more disciplined ones. Somewhere there may be presses, mangles, drying lines, or airing frames depending on the period and place. We do not need to claim one single universal layout. It is enough to say that laundry required space, heat, moisture, carrying, and attention. Laundry is physical history. Sheets are heavy when damp. Blankets hold water. Towels do not fold themselves. Cloth has to move through hands and across surfaces. One of the reasons hospital laundry deserves its own episode is that it reminds us how bodily institutions were, even in their supporting systems. Care did not happen only in ideas and prescriptions. It also happened through material handling. If you listen closely to a washhouse scene, the sounds are small and repetitive. Cloth shaken once. Water poured. A cartwheel turning. A bundle set down on wood. Steam lifting. No one event is important by itself. The importance comes from accumulation. 10 sheets, 50 sheets, 100 towels, the labor of clean fabric entering and leaving the system again and again, always in time for the next need. And that phrase, in time, matters. Laundry is not only about cleanliness, it is about timing. Clean linen delivered too late is almost as useless to the ward as linen not delivered at all. So before dawn, or in the first quiet stretch of morning, the system tries to get ahead of the day. The hospital knows, even if nobody speaks it aloud, that by midday the corridors will be busier and the interruptions more frequent. So the early hour becomes a strategic hour. The cart appears now. It stands in a corridor under warm light, simple and unglamorous. On it are folded sheets, stacked towels, perhaps a blanket or two, arranged in stable piles. The cart is one of the most perfect objects in institutional history because it is humble and purposeful. It does not claim attention, yet it solves the problem of distance inside a building. A hospital is a place of rooms separated by doors, stairs, turns, and thresholds. A cart carries order through that geography. If you have ever seen an empty service corridor in an old building, you know the peculiar calm of that space. It is not decorated for visitors. It is not meant to impress. It is meant to function, and that is why it can feel so truthful. In the service corridor, the hospital admits what it really needs: transport, storage, routine, and enough discipline to move clean things and soiled things without confusion. Modern infection control language helps us understand that distinction very clearly. The CDC's guidance on healthcare laundry and bedding treats hospital textiles as part of a controlled process. It names what is included: sheets, blankets, towels, gowns, patient apparel, uniforms, drapes, and more. It distinguishes clean handling from soiled handling. It speaks in the language of containment, transport, processing, drying, pressing, packaging, and storage. That is modern wording, and we should not project it backward too carelessly onto every earlier century. But it gives us a useful frame. The hospital laundry story is not random domestic work, it is process. Even when older hospitals used different terms and had fewer formal controls, they were still confronting the same physical problem. How to manage cloth that passes close to patients, then passes out of sight, then returns in a state fit for use again. That return is easy to underestimate. The patient sees the sheet arrive at the bed. The patient does not usually see the path behind it, but the path matters. Someone stored it. Someone moved it. Someone kept it separate from other things. Someone made sure there would be enough. In a large institution, enough is a beautiful word. Enough means no frantic search at sunrise. Enough means the ward sister does not send someone running down the hall because the shelves are bare. Enough means the bed can be remade without improvisation. Enough means the patient's experience of the hospital is calmer than the machinery behind it. Let us pause now at the laundry ledger. There is a desk somewhere in this history. Perhaps it is beside the linen room. Perhaps it sits in an office near a service door. Perhaps it is only a corner table under a lamp. On it lies a book or a card, and on that surface lives one of the oldest companions of institutional care, counting. Not all hospitals counted in the same way. Not every period used the same forms. We should be careful and not invent a fictional ledger system as if it were universal. Still, once linen becomes important to administration, records follow naturally. How many items were issued? How many returned? Which ward needed more? What had worn out? What had been delayed? The language may differ by place and century, but the principle is familiar. Material systems require memory, and institutions usually build memory on paper. This is one reason hospital history can be so soothing when told slowly. It is full of lists. Lists of objects, lists of rooms, lists of needs, lists of supplies. The drama is low, but the structure is high. And structure, especially at night, can be comforting. Now we come to a detail that might seem unimportant at first, and then begins to feel strangely central: the laundry chute. By the middle of the 20th century, hospital systems were being examined with greater technical scrutiny. One sign of that is the 1958 JAMA article about hospital laundry and refuse chutes as sources of staphylococcic cross-infection. We do not need to turn that into an alarm story. In fact, for this channel, we should do the opposite. The point is not that every chute was sinister. The point is that by this period, hospitals were learning to inspect their own architecture more carefully. A chute is an ordinary solution to vertical movement. Instead of carrying materials by hand down several floors, the building lets gravity help. It is efficient. It is quiet. It saves labor. And precisely because it seems so practical, it can disappear into the background of institutional life. That is why it becomes interesting when public health attention turns toward it. A hidden convenience is still part of the patient environment if it affects how materials and air move through the building. This is a common pattern in medical history. What once looked like mere convenience later appears as system design. What once looked like domestic routine later appears as infection control. What once looked like simple housekeeping later appears as part of care's infrastructure. Hospital laundry sits exactly in that transition. At one end is the older domestic imagination of the hospital: clean sheets, orderly rooms, aired bedding, the moral weight of neatness and quiet. At the other end is the more technical language of process, transport, packaging, and controlled handling. Between them lies a long stretch of institutional learning, and our episode floats gently along that stretch rather than racing through it. Let us return now to the cloth itself. A folded sheet has a peculiar dignity. It does not show the patient. It does not show the illness. It does not show the moment of pain. It shows preparation. It shows readiness. It shows that someone expected need and answered it in advance. That is why so much of this story is object-led rather than people-led. Folded linen on shelves, tied bundles on a table, towels stacked in light from a window, a basket on the floor waiting for its next use, a lamp beside pressed cloth. These are not minor details, they are the quiet grammar of institutional care at rest. And when we follow them across a whole morning, a pattern appears. First the room is checked, then the linen is counted, then the washhouse continues what it began earlier, then the cart is loaded, then the corridor receives it, then the ward takes what it needs, then the bed is remade, then the shelf looks different, slightly lower, slightly emptier, quietly asking for the cycle to begin again. It is easy to admire grand inventions in medical history. It is harder, but perhaps wiser, to admire maintenance. Laundry is maintenance. It is repetition that protects the institution from visible disorder. It is work whose success is often judged by its invisibility. No one cheers a correctly stocked linen shelf. No one writes triumphant speeches about a cart arriving on time. And yet a hospital without these things cannot keep its promises very well. Nightingale understood something close to this when she wrote about the ordinary surroundings of the sick room. Her focus was not only on dramatic intervention, but on conditions. A patient lives inside conditions. Bedding is one of them. Air is one of them. Quiet is one of them. Warmth is one of them. Once you see care as conditions as well as actions, laundry history becomes much more interesting. It becomes a history of climate made by hand. A clean sheet changes the immediate climate of the body. A dry blanket changes the body's relation to warmth. A well-managed linen room changes the climate of the ward by reducing delay and disorder. A carefully planned washhouse changes the climate of the building by moving cloth through space with some degree of control. This is not glamorous medicine. It is environmental medicine in the older, broader sense of surroundings mattering. And that older sense still feels surprisingly modern. The CDC document, though written in a very different register, quietly confirms that the hospital still thinks about laundry as a system of handling rather than as a pile of cloth. Textiles must be contained, transported, processed, dried, pressed or finished, packaged or stored. Even now, the work remains logistical and material. The terms are more formal, but the sequence is recognizable. Something leaves the patient environment. It is moved, it is handled under rules, it is returned in another state. The cycle continues. Now imagine the very end of the morning's first round. The light is stronger at the windows. The ward is more awake. Footsteps are more frequent. The cart that was full is less full now. Somewhere a shelf in the linen room has been reduced by one stable stack. A ledger, if there is one, has one more mark. A worker pauses beside a table and straightens a bundle with a hand that has done the same motion thousands of times. This is the point where our episode becomes almost meditative, because hospital laundry before dawn is really a study in the dignity of repeated useful motion. Fold, lift, carry, set down, count, store, return. Nothing in that list is spectacular. Together they make an institution habitable. Before we close, let us look once more at what this story does not need in order to matter. It does not need a heroic individual. It does not need blood. It does not need a dramatic epidemic retold at full volume. It does not need a surgical instrument on a tray. It is enough, for our purposes tonight, to follow the sheet from room to room and to notice how many kinds of order are required before it comes back clean and ready. The older hospital, like the modern one, relied on visible care and invisible care. Visible care is easier to narrate. Invisible care is often easier to live inside. The patient resting under a clean blanket may never know the exact route by which that blanket returned, but the route existed. And because it existed, the bed felt different. That difference is the quiet subject of our episode. So when you picture the hospital before dawn, do not picture only the patient. Picture also the shelf. Picture the folded stack. Picture the service corridor. Picture the cart waiting in warm lamplight. Picture the washhouse air, softened by steam. Picture the closed tube panel, ordinary and architectural. Picture the desk with its record book. Picture the return of linen to the ward before the larger movements of the day begin. Medical history is often told through bold discoveries and famous names, but another history runs beside it, a slower history, a history of arrangement, ventilation, carrying, drying, sorting, and making rooms fit for recovery. Hospital laundry belongs to that quieter history. It belongs to the morning hour before speeches, before rounds, before public attention. It belongs to care as preparation. And perhaps that is why it is such a good subject for sleep. The work has rhythm. The rooms have order. The objects repeat themselves gently. The day begins not with noise but with handling. The sheet is folded. The towel is stacked. The blanket is aired. The cart is pushed. The ledger is marked. The ward receives what it needs. And somewhere, without ceremony, a hospital keeps one of its oldest promises that the bed will be ready again. Thank you for spending this quiet hour with the linens, corridors, and washhouse rooms of medical history. The sleepy Medical History channel will return with another slow story. Until then, sleep well. Let us stay a little longer with the linen room, because a room of shelves can teach us a great deal about how hospitals learn to think. At first glance, the room is simple. There are folded sheets. There are towels. There are blankets. There may be aprons, pillow covers, gowns, and cloths used for many ordinary purposes. Nothing in the room asks to be admired. Nothing announces a breakthrough. But the longer we stand there, the more the room begins to look like a quiet map of the hospital itself. One stack belongs near the ward. One stack is kept back for later. One shelf is easy to reach because it is used often. One shelf is higher, less disturbed, waiting for a need that comes less frequently. Every arrangement tells us that someone has watched the rhythm of the building. Someone has noticed that some things run out before others. Someone has learned that if a certain shelf is not checked before morning, the rest of the day may begin with a small frustration. This kind of knowledge rarely appears in famous medical timelines, but hospitals could not function without it. In a sleepy history, we can give that knowledge the attention it deserves. Picture the shelves before the first broad light of day. The room is not dark. It has a lamp, perhaps a small one, and perhaps a window where the sky is beginning to turn pale. The cloth is folded with practical care. The edges are not perfect in a decorative sense. They are perfect in a decorative sense. They are perfect enough for work. A hospital does not need the linen room to look like a drawing room. It needs the linen room to answer when called. This is the difference between display and readiness. Display says, "Look at me." Readiness says, "I am here when needed." Hospital laundry belongs almost entirely to readiness. That is why the subject feels so calm. It is full of objects that are prepared before the dramatic hour. The clean sheet is not dramatic when it appears. Its usefulness depends on all the unshown steps that came earlier: washing, drying, carrying, folding, storing, counting, and returning. Each of those steps is modest. Together, they create the condition in which a bed can be remade without fuss. There is an old dignity in that. Now imagine that the room is attached to a corridor. The door opens softly. A cart waits outside. Its wheels are not theatrical. They are practical wheels, the kind that make a small sound over an old floor. The cart is loaded slowly, because a badly loaded cart creates work later. Stacks must not slide. Cloth must not drag. A blanket placed carelessly can pull at the stack beneath it. A tower of towels that looks stable in the linen room may lean by the second turn of the corridor. So the loading itself is a form of knowledge. Heavy things lower, frequently needed things within reach. Nothing hanging over the edge, nothing that will brush the wall if the corridor narrows. These are not grand rules. They are the rules of moving useful things through a building that has its own shape and resistance. The hospital corridor, in this episode, should stay empty and gentle. No alarm, no rush, no faces turned toward trouble. Only the cart, the light, and the architecture. The corridor reminds us that a hospital is also a system of distances. From ward to linen room, from linen room to washhouse, from washhouse to storage, from storage back to the ward. Care has to travel through those distances somehow. In older hospitals, architecture could either help that travel or make it harder. Stairs, narrow turns, service passages, doors, storage rooms, and ventilation all belonged to the practical life of the building. Nightingale's hospital writing belongs in this part of the story because she did not treat hospital design as a neutral container. The building mattered, its arrangement mattered, its air mattered, its domestic departments mattered. Even when she was not describing our exact linen cart, her broader point helps us understand why a service corridor is not merely a hallway. It is part of the working body of the hospital. Let us follow the cart slowly. It moves past a wall where the paint has been rubbed by years of passing work. It pauses near a door. It turns where the corridor widens. It carries clean cloth through spaces where most visitors never go. If there is a window, the first light touches the top of the stack and makes the white cloth look almost blue. If there is no window, the lamp gives it a soft yellow edge. Nothing has happened, and yet everything is being prepared. This is how maintenance enters history. It does not usually arrive as a single event. It arrives as 1,000 correct repetitions. A shelf checked at the right time, a bundle tied securely, a cart loaded in the right order, a corridor crossed before it is busy, a ward supplied before the need becomes urgent. In the washhouse, the same principle appears in a different form. The washhouse is warmer. It has more moisture in the air. The surfaces are more work-worn. In memory, we can keep it calm and almost still. Wooden tables, tubs, pale steam, folded cloth waiting at the edge of the room. We do not need to imagine workers in view. We do not need drama. The room itself can carry the meaning. Laundry has always been a negotiation with water. Dry cloth is light and obedient. Wet cloth has weight. It clings, it pulls downward. It changes the body of the person handling it. It changes the body of the person handling it. It changes the pace of the work. A dry sheet can be folded neatly by one person. A damp sheet asks for more patience. A blanket that has taken up water becomes an object with its own gravity. This simple physical fact matters because it reminds us that hospital systems were made by labor, not by intention alone. It is easy to say that a hospital should be clean. It is harder to carry, wash, dry, and return all the cloth that such a sentence requires. Cleanliness, in the everyday institutional sense, has a material cost. It takes space. It takes time. It takes heat. It takes ham. It takes a routine that can survive interruption. That is why the word routine should not be dismissed. A routine can be dull, but it can also be protective. When a hospital routine is well made, it catches tasks before they fall into disorder. It says, this is when the linen is counted. This is where the clean cloth goes. This is how the soiled cloth is kept apart. This is when the cart returns. This is who checks the shelf. Modern guidance uses modern language for these things. It names textiles, containment, transport, laundering, drying, pressing or finishing, packaging, and storage. We should keep that language in its proper time. Still, it helps us see the skeleton of the process. Something leaves one state and returns in another. Between those two states is a managed path. The path is the story. Now let us pause at the idea of separation. The clean and the soiled should not be confused. That sounds simple enough, but in a large building, simple things require systems, separate spaces, separate carts or containers, separate handling, separate habits in the mind. A worker has to know not only what an object is, but where in the process that object belongs. The same kind of cloth can have different meanings depending on where it is and what has happened to it. A sheet folded on the clean shelf is readiness. A sheet leaving the ward is work not yet completed. A sheet in the washhouse is transition. A sheet returning to the shelf is order restored. The object is the same kind of object, but the system gives it a different status. That is an important lesson in hospital history. Institutions do not only manage people, they manage states. Clean, soiled, stored, issued, returned, delayed, ready. These words are quiet, but they are powerful. They allow a building to coordinate itself. And because this is a sleepy channel, we can let those words pass slowly. Clean, stored, issued, returned, ready. Each word lowers the volume of the room. The laundry ledger, if we return to it, is one way the hospital remembers these states. It may be a book, it may be a card, it may be a simple count, made in whatever form the institution used at that time. We should not overstate the details, but we can safely say that counting belongs naturally to linen work. When objects move in quantity, memory needs help. A ledger is memory with lines. It tells the institution what has passed through its hands. It reduces the chance that a shortage will appear as a surprise. It gives shape to repetition. In our imagined scene, the ledger does not need readable text. We do not need fake handwriting. We do not need invented names. We need only the presence of the book, the lamp, the folded cloth, and the sense that someone has made a record. The absence of invented detail keeps the scene honest. Honesty matters in a channel like this. A sleepy medical history episode should not fabricate proof. It should not invent a hospital ledger and then let the viewer believe it is real. It can create an atmosphere, but the claims must remain modest. That is why our script returns again and again to cautious language. Perhaps, usually, in many hospitals, over time, the exact arrangement varied. Those phrases are not weakness. They are part of good historical narration. They let the past keep its complexity. They let the viewer rest without being misled. Now let us move from the ledger to the chute. The chute is a small architectural idea with a long shadow. It is a vertical path built into the hospital. It saves steps. It lets gravity do some of the work. It can seem so ordinary that no one thinks about it until a problem turns attention toward it. In the mid-20th century, hospital laundry and refuse chutes were studied as possible sources of Staphylococcus cross-infection. That phrasing sounds severe, so we will handle it gently. The point is not fear, the point is attention. Hospitals learned again and again that hidden systems matter. Air shafts matter, chutes matter, corridors matter, storage rooms matter. Storage rooms matter. The things behind the scenes can influence the spaces in front of the patient. A laundry chute, then, becomes more than a convenience. It becomes a reminder that buildings participate in care. The chute, in this quiet account, should remain closed, plain and ordinary. A panel in a wall, a basket below it, warm light, no soiled cloth shown, no threat, no spectacle. The thought is simple. Here is a piece of architecture that once looked ordinary and later became worth studying more carefully. That is enough. Sleepy history does not need to shout to be serious. From the chute, we can return to the bed, because every path in this episode eventually returns there. The bed is waiting. It is empty in our scene. The sheet is turned down. The blanket is simple. The iron frame, if we imagine one, catches the morning light. There are no instruments, no anxious faces, no visible distress. Only a room prepared for use. The bed is where the institution becomes personal again. Everything we have followed through the building has been moving toward this quiet surface. The shelf mattered because the bed would need linen. The wash house mattered because the bed would need clean cloth. The cart mattered because the bed would need clean cloth. The cart mattered because the bed was not beside the laundry. The ledger mattered because the bed was one of many beds. The chute mattered because the bed was part of a larger system of movement. Seen this way, the hospital bed is not isolated. It is the visible end of many hidden processes. It receives the work of rooms the patient may never enter. It gathers the labor of people the patient may never meet. And because of that, the sheet on the bed becomes more than a sheet. It becomes evidence that the hospital has remembered the patient in advance. That is a soft and powerful idea. To be cared for is partly to be expected. The towel is ready before the hand reaches for it. The blanket is folded before the chill arrives. The bed is prepared before the patient returns. The institution, at its best, anticipates need. Of course, hospitals were never perfect. We do not need to pretend that they were. Old hospitals could be crowded, poorly ventilated, badly supplied, or unevenly managed. The history of hospital laundry is not a fairy tale about constant order. It is a story about the effort to create order in places where disorder was always possible. That effort is what makes the subject human. The linen room might run low, the washhouse might fall behind, the weather might slow drying, the cart might arrive late, the record might be incomplete. Every system can fail, but a system exists because people have tried to make failure less likely. That is the deeper point. Laundry history is the history of reducing small risks before they become large interruptions. It is the history of making ordinary care more dependable, and dependable things are often the most restful things to think about at night. The same shelf, the same cart, the same folded edge, the same morning route, the same return to the ward. Repetition can be oppressive in some stories. Here it is gentle. It is the repetition of work that supports rest. So let us imagine the morning sequence once more, from beginning to end. The linen room is checked. A stack is lifted. A cart is loaded. The service corridor receives the wheels. The washhouse continues its slow work elsewhere. The ledger waits on the desk. The chute panel stays closed in the wall. The first light grows stronger. The bed receives its sheet. Nothing in this sequence asks us to stay awake. It asks only that we notice. Let us begin again, but from another doorway. This time, do not enter the ward first. Enter the building through its quieter side, the service side, where the hospital reveals less of its ceremony and more of its practical mind. The walls are plainer here. The corners are more work-worn. The air does not belong to visitors. It belongs to tasks, and one of those tasks, repeated so often that it can disappear from notice, is the care of cloth. The older hospital lived in fabric. Beds required it. Pillows required it. Pillows required it. Wash basins were wiped with it. Aprons were worn over it. Windows were curtained beside it. Shelves held it. Carts carried it. And because cloth was everywhere, the management of cloth became a quiet measure of the institution's character. A well-run hospital did not prove itself only through the authority of the doctor or the steadiness of the nurse. It also proved itself through preparation. Was the room aired? Was the bed in order? Were the sheets available? Could the ward receive what it needed without a scramble? Could the building transform a used object into a ready object and return it at the right time? These are humble questions. They are also central ones. When Florence Nightingale wrote about nursing, she returned repeatedly to the conditions around the patient. Air, warmth, light, quiet, cleanliness, observation, bedding. In that company, bedding does not look trivial. It looks foundational. It belongs to the patient's immediate world, and the patient's immediate world is where discomfort and relief are often first felt. If a room is close and stale, the body knows it before any theory is named. If a blanket is damp and cold, the body knows it before any chart is written. If a sheet is clean, dry, and settled into place, the body knows that too. The history of laundry, then, is partly the history of how hospitals shaped feeling without fanfare. This is easy to forget because feeling is soft evidence. It leaves less paperwork than a surgery, less prestige than a lecture, less public memory than a dramatic outbreak, but institutions are lived from the inside. To be a patient in a hospital is not only to be diagnosed. It is to lie in a bed, hear a corridor, smell a room, feel a pillow, notice a draft, wait for warmth, and meet the building through texture as much as through speech. That is why cloth matters. It is one of the hospital's most intimate materials. It lies between body and mattress, between hand and basin, between the chill of air and the promise of warmth, between disorder and the appearance of order. And because it is intimate, it requires a larger system behind it. No sheet appears at the bedside by itself. No folded towel carries itself to the ward. No blanket dries itself, sorts itself, stores itself, and returns itself. When we look at hospital laundry, we're looking at invisible cooperation made visible through finished objects. The finished object is the folded sheet. The hidden cooperation is everything that brought it there. Now imagine the earliest working hour of the day. There is a moment in large buildings when the night has not entirely withdrawn and the day has not entirely declared itself. That in-between hour belongs to maintenance. It belongs to the people and tasks that prefer a little space before the corridors begin to fill. Laundry before dawn belongs naturally to that interval. The light is thin, the shelves are still, the cart waits. The washhouse is already remembering yesterday's use and preparing for today's. There may be steam, there may be cool air at a service window. There may be the dry smell of folded linen in one room and the heavier smell of damp cloth in another. The hospital is not yet performing itself for the public. It is arranging itself for work. This idea of arrangement deserves more attention than it usually receives. In history, we often praise invention. We speak of discovery. We speak of reform. We speak of genius. But many institutions survive not through invention alone, but through arrangement. They place the right thing in the right place at the right time, often enough that the building becomes dependable. Dependability may not sound poetic, but inside a hospital, it can feel like mercy. The linen room is one of dependability's quiet homes. Nothing in it is grand. Shelves, bundles, stacks, a table, perhaps a basket, perhaps a narrow record book. Yet every object in the room suggests a future action. This will be taken later. That will be replaced later. This stack is nearly low. That bundle can wait another day. The room speaks in future tense. It says, someone will need this. Someone will need this. Someone will count this. Someone will count this. Someone will notice if this is absent. Hospitals are filled with such anticipations. The patient may believe that care begins when a nurse enters the room. In a sense it does, but in another sense, care began earlier, in a storeroom, in a washhouse, in a corridor, in a decision made before the patient's need was visible. That earlier care is the subject we are following. We can think of it as care in advance. A towel prepared before washing is needed, a blanket aired before evening cold, a cart loaded before the call reaches the hallway, a shelf checked before the shortage becomes public. This is one of the gentlest ideas in medical history, that preparation itself can be a form of care. And now let us think about labor, because no history of hospital laundry can be honest without it. The folded stack on a shelf is calm to look at, but the calm object can hide strenuous work. Cloth resists the fantasy that institutions run by ideas alone. Damp cloth pulls on the shoulder. Wet blankets ask for strength. Repetition asks for stamina. Carrying asks for balance. Sorting asks for patience. Folding asks for time. Drying asks for space and weather or heat or both. The cloth tells the truth about material life. It is not abstract. If a hospital has many beds, it has many linens. If it has many linens, it has many returns. If it has many returns, it has many decisions. Where does this go? When is this ready? Who carries that? How many remain? What happens if rain slows the drying? What happens if an extra ward suddenly requires more supply? Even if the exact procedures vary from one hospital to another, the underlying burden was real. Laundry was one of the ways the building met its own scale, and scale changes the meaning of ordinary objects. A towel in a private home is one towel. A towel in a hospital is one unit in a system. A sheet in a private room can wait until morning. A sheet in a ward may belong to a chain of needs. Institutional life enlarges domestic tasks until they become logistical problems. That enlargement is part of what makes hospital history so interesting. It turns everyday materials into public health materials without changing their basic form. The sheet is still a sheet. The towel is still a towel. The basket is still a basket. And yet inside the institution they now belong to planning, movement, and control. That control should be understood gently, not harshly. We are not speaking about command for its own sake. We are speaking about the discipline required to prevent confusion. The clean should remain distinct from the soiled. The available should remain visible to those who need it. The movement of materials should not add unnecessary disorder to a building that already has enough human uncertainty within it. This is where the calm language of the CDC, though modern, becomes unexpectedly helpful. It does not romanticize laundry. It treats it as a process: containment, transport, laundering, drying, finishing, packaging, storage. The words are plain and exact. They reduce the cloth to stages, yet in doing so, they reveal something that older institutions were gradually learning in their own way. Cloth in a hospital is not random fabric. It is fabric under management. Management does not remove the humanity from the work. It gives the humanity a structure. Without structure, work becomes noise. Without structure, a corridor becomes congestion. Without structure, a shelf becomes guesswork. Without structure, the patient experiences the uncertainty of the institution instead of its steadiness. This is why the closed laundry chute panel matters more than it first appears to matter. It is a symbol of a building trying to make movement efficient. It is also a reminder that efficiency can have consequences, and that the background systems of a hospital eventually become objects of scrutiny in their own right. The 1958 concern with chutes as possible sources of cross-infection tells us something important. The hospital had begun to examine not only what happened at the bedside, but what happened in the routes between places. Routes matter. The route from ward to soiled handling. The route from soiled handling to washing. The route from washing to drying. The route from drying to folding. The route from folding to storage. The route from storage back to the ward. The patient may see only one short piece of this route. The building must somehow hold the whole map, and because the building holds the map, architecture becomes part of care's story. Nightingale understood that buildings were not neutral shells. A badly arranged hospital did not merely look inconvenient, it could work against comfort, cleanliness, and effective administration. An intelligently arranged one did not cure by magic, but it could reduce friction. It could help good habits survive the day. Friction is another quiet subject in institutional history. A heavy door in the wrong place, a corridor too narrow for easy passage, a shelf too high for frequent use, a chute that solves one problem and creates another, a room too damp for storage, a distance too long between washing and return. The older hospital was full of such frictions. Laundry work lets us see them because cloth must travel through them. Hard surfaces, narrow turns, stairs, thresholds, storage decisions, and air conditions all become visible when we follow an ordinary bundle from one room to another. We are, in a sense, following resistance. How does a building resist useful work? How does a routine soften that resistance? How do people learn the shape of a place well enough to move through it without waste? These are the kinds of questions that make even a quiet corridor interesting. Now let us imagine that the ward has received its clean linen. The bed is remade. The shelf there is no longer bare. A patient who never saw the washhouse will still encounter its result. The pillow feels fresher. The sheet lies flatter. The blanket no longer carries the stale weight of long use. Something has been corrected, and the correction arrives not as an announcement, but as a sensation. That is another reason hospital laundry belongs in a sleep channel. It is about comfort entering the room softly. No trumpet, no lecture, only the changed feeling of the bed. Many histories of medicine concentrate on moments of intervention. A dose is given, a tool is used, a wound is dressed. Those moments matter, but they do not exhaust the meaning of care. There is also the slower history of making a room habitable, a room fit for waiting, a room fit for weakness, a room fit for sleep. Linen belongs to that slower history. And if we look at the bed one last time, we can see how many kinds of labor have disappeared into its apparent simplicity. Hands washed the cloth. Hands dried it. Hands folded it. Hands stacked it. Hands loaded it. Hands pushed it through the corridor. Hands stored it. Hands returned it. The patient meets the end of that chain as comfort. This is not sentimental, it is exact. Comfort is often made by systems before it is felt by bodies. The better the system, the quieter the feeling. The quieter the feeling, the less likely history is to notice it. So tonight, we are noticing it on purpose. We are giving the shelf, the cart, the ledger, the chute, the washhouse, and the folded sheet their due place in the history of care. Not as heroic inventions, not as decorative background, but as parts of a hospital learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to support recovery through order. If that order sometimes failed, that too is part of the story. If the building was crowded, the cloth moved through crowding. If the weather was wet, the cloth absorbed the weather's delay. If the institution grew faster than its routines, the shortage would appear first in humble places, a shelf too low, a basket too full, a return too late. In that sense, laundry is a sensitive instrument. It reveals strain quickly. It reveals abundance too. When there is enough linen, enough storage, enough time, and enough order, the building feels more forgiving. When there is not enough, the shortage travels outward until someone at the bedside feels it. That is why enough remains such an important word. Enough linen. Enough dry space. Enough quiet hours before the ward is busy. Enough routine to keep confusion from spreading. Enough foresight that the patient does not feel the panic of the institution. The hospital before dawn is trying, above all, to create enough readiness, enough cleanliness, enough order, enough cloth, enough calm. And if it succeeds, the success looks almost invisible. The corridor is simply quiet, the cart is simply there, the shelf is simply stocked, the bed is simply ready. The patient lies down and does not have to think about the machinery behind the softness. That is the quiet triumph of hospital laundry. It hides labor inside ease. It turns repeated effort into an atmosphere that feels natural. It lets care arrive in the form of something as simple and as necessary as a clean sheet waiting in the half-light before morning. Let us close this history by staying for a while with return. So much of hospital laundry is a story of return. The cloth leaves. The cloth is handled. The cloth comes back. The shelf empties and fills. The cart departs and returns. The ward sends out and receives again. The building exhales disorder and inhales order, not once but over and over through the same routes. Return is what gives the work its rhythm. Without return, there would only be disappearance. With return, there is reassurance. That reassurance may be one of the oldest comforts of institutional life. The patient who sees a bed remade may not think this is a system of return. Yet that is exactly what the patient is seeing. The cloth went away. It was attended to somewhere beyond sight. It came back changed. It came back ready. The return says that the building remembers its obligations. That memory matters. Hospitals ask a great deal of trust. Patients surrender privacy, ease, and certainty. They hand themselves over to spaces not built for leisure, but for treatment and waiting. In such places, small proofs of order carry unusual weight. A fresh sheet may not cure, but it tells the body that neglect has not entirely won. It says that someone, somewhere in the institution, kept faith with an ordinary promise. Promises in hospitals are often made through routine rather than speech. The lamp will be lit. The corridor will be watched. The basin will be brought. The sheet will be changed. The blanket will return. The room will not be abandoned to accident if effort can prevent it. Laundry belongs to this quiet republic of effort. And because it belongs there, it also belongs to time. Cloth records time differently from brick or metal. Brick endures. Metal wears. Cloth absorbs use. It softens, thins, tears, frays, fades, and eventually leaves the cycle entirely. A linen system is therefore not only about movement, but about replacement. New cloth enters. Old cloth disappears. A shelf that looks constant is never exactly the same shelf. The hospital maintains continuity through changing objects. This too is worth noticing at night. Stability is often made from things that do not last forever. The routine survives because the pieces are renewed. The room stays ready because its contents are tended, counted, mended, replaced, and moved along. The patient may only feel the immediate softness of the sheet, but behind that softness is the larger discipline of upkeep. Upkeep is not a glamorous word, yet it deserves respect. Civilizations are full of splendid beginnings. Institutions are full of ordinary upkeep. One announces itself, the other continues after the announcement is over. Hospital laundry belongs to the second category. It is one of the ways a building proves it can go on. Day after day, night after day, night after night, admission after admission, recovery after recovery, loss after loss. The cloth does not end suffering, but it helps the institution remain usable in the presence of suffering. That is a sober, calming thought. The system does not promise perfection. It promises continuation. Tomorrow there will still be shelves. Tomorrow there will still be folded stacks. Tomorrow someone will still push a cart through the corridor. Tomorrow the washhouse or whatever room serves its purpose will again receive what the ward sends out. The building is a machine of repetition, but repetition here is not meaningless. It is a way of carrying care forward through time. If we listen closely, even the language of laundry has a slow pulse to it. Wash, dry, fold, store, return, count, carry, stalled, return, count, carry, air, stack. Each word is short. Each word is practical. None of them pretends to wisdom. Yet placed together they form a little liturgy of maintenance, a sequence of actions through which comfort is made possible for strangers. And strangers matter here. Hospitals are places where people arrive without belonging to one another, and yet must depend on one another quickly. The patient depends on the nurse. The nurse depends on the orderly rhythm of the ward. The ward depends on the rooms behind it. The rooms behind it depend on workers, habits, architecture, and supply. Laundry is one of the material languages through which strangers become part of the same temporary order. The patient may never learn the names of the hands that folded the sheet. The worker who folded it may never see the patient who receives it. Still, the exchange is real. Cloth becomes a messenger between lives that do not meet. It carries effort across distance. It turns anonymous labor into intimate comfort. Few materials do that so quietly, and because it is quiet, it is easy to overlook. This episode has tried not to overlook it. We have stayed with the folded stack, the service corridor, the linen room, the washhouse, the cart, the ledger, the chute, and the bed. We have let the topic remain calm. We have avoided spectacle because spectacle would distort the truth of the subject. The truth is quieter. The truth is that hospitals have long depended on repeated acts of sorting, carrying, separating, drying, folding, and returning. The truth is that such acts shaped the patient's world more than grand speeches ever could. So if you picture the hospital one last time, picture it in layers. At the surface is the bed, ready in the pale light. Behind that is the ward, receiving its morning order. Behind that is the corridor, where the cart has already passed. Behind that is the linen room, where a shelf has lowered by one stack. Behind that is the washhouse, where damp cloth is becoming dry cloth. Behind that is the larger idea of the institution trying, however imperfectly, to keep itself fit for human vulnerability. This is what the sheet finally represents. Not luxury, not decoration, not mere housekeeping. It represents a building's attempt to remain kind in practical ways. And practical kindness has always been one of the deepest forms of care. The room is aired, the shelf is checked, the cart is loaded, the bed is remade. The patient does not need to think about all that has happened. It is enough that the cloth is there, quiet and ready, in the half-light before the day fully begins. That may be the most sleep-worthy thought in this whole history. That care can arrive without noise. That order can be built from repetition. That comfort can travel through the hands of strangers. that a hospital before dawn can express its best intentions, not through grandeur, but through the simple return of clean linen to an empty bed waiting for the next human need. Before the first full light reached the ward windows, the laundry had already done its quiet work. Clean sheets waited in measured stacks. Towels had been counted, folded, and returned. The cart in the corridor carried order before it carried comfort. None of this asked to be remembered by name, yet it changed how the room felt to the person lying in bed and to the nurse beginning another long morning. In that sense, the history of hospital laundry is not only about washing, it is about the patient environment itself, shaped in silence, one folded piece of linen before dawn.